So Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. It's complete. I'm done with it. And it was fantastic, and I want to talk about it. So I'm going to add my video on top of the pile of millions of others just like this one. But I will say I feel like FromSoft videos are very easy to just keep watching over and over and over again. Like I've watched so many other reviews of Shadow of the Erdtree because everyone's experience is so different in FromSoft games, be it the builds, the bosses they liked or disliked, the bosses that they had trouble with versus the bosses they thought was super easy. They got it on their first try. The open world concepts, the legacy dungeons, the lore, like what parts of the lore did you find interesting versus not? Everyone's opinions are so different. Everyone's experience is so different with From Software games that I feel like adding another Shadow of the Erdtree review video on top of the massive heap that already exists, honestly, it kind of just feels like an evergreen topic to continuously talk about until the end of time. So we're here, we're doing it. Let's get started. So of course it all starts with the step out moment, where FromSoft reiterates to everyone that they don't know what true beauty is until you've played one of their games. Every time I play a modern Soulsborne or hell, even their old stuff, I wonder why other studios aren't able to create worlds like this. Every fantasy RPG has the same tropes, the castles, the wizards, the medieval waifus, then Elden Ring DLC drops and we all lose our collective shit. The world is gorgeous, like we're running through a painting, and no matter how many times we've seen it from this studio, they continue to raise the bar. I especially love what appears to be a giant veil that extends across the sky. The lore tells us that the Shadowlands are concealed from the rest of the lands between by one of Marika's concealment spells. She literally covered the Land of Shadows with a big blanket, and for the developers to portray it in a physical manner in a way that the players can comprehend and make it so beautiful, I think is just magnificent. And can I just say how wonderful it is to be back in a FromSoft world? It's been years since base Elden Ring dropped, and the size of this DLC, the content richness of it, it felt like we were dropping into an entirely new game. So the open world. Gotta get this one off my chest because as stunning as it was visually, the open world felt pretty empty in comparison to the base game. And I know it's not just me, I've seen this opinion from many others online as well. So much of my time was spent traveling from point A to B with nothing of note to collect, explore, or pull me away from my linear horseback ride. Now understand, I really hate the term walking simulator. I feel like people just casually throw it around at any game that has a little bit of a slower pace to it. But there were long stretches in this open world where I felt like I was just holding the joystick forward, going from side of grace to side of grace. And I don't really know what else to call it at that point. Caves, catacombs, and overworld bosses were still scattered about, but the pickings felt slim, and when I did eventually find some, the rewards were usually lackluster. Now, there are plenty of items to find, but 90% of them are it's ghost gloveworts, cookbooks, crafting materials, of which I already had a massive stockpile. It honestly felt like FromSoft ran out of ideas as to what to give the player for completing these optional tasks. We're used to getting weapons, armor, and runes for our struggles, but as most of us will experience this DLC as in-game content, what more can FromSoft really give other than rare smithing stones? Well, I actually do have a suggestion for that, but we'll get to it later. So the world felt more empty and the items and rewards felt fairly lackluster, and that's super disappointing to say since exploration was arguably the best feature of the base game, but for me at least, it's the worst part of this DLC. On a more positive note, the sheer variety of locations is incredible. For such a small open world, and I put that in air quotes, Miyazaki and the team were able to incorporate ancient ruins, foggy swamps, a coastline region, magma-filled temples, lightning-covered mountaintops, a field of crimson flowers, our classic medieval castles, and some godlike realms that illuminate with holy light. Just fantastic, and honestly, I'm probably missing a few. The verticality is also something I think future open world games really need to explore more of. Miyazaki said to us pre-launch that this map was about the size of Limgrave, but he didn't specify that the world was really multiple Limgraves layered on top of each other. They even managed to maintain the interconnected and purposeful layout of their map design. Precision map design is something they've always been known for, and they really push some boundaries with this DLC. Now, this does occasionally make it difficult to read your map, as it takes a trained eye to discern elevation on a 2D map, but it was absolutely impressive nonetheless. Some sections of the map are also locked off with puzzles or hidden passages, which I both do and don't like at times. Like, it's a fun idea, it's cheeky, but boy, I got really frustrated when there's an empty spot on my map, and I feel like I've tried every possible route to reach this damn place, and oh, it's behind an illusionary wall. You cheeky bastards. But regardless of how you feel, the worlds they've created here are nothing short of spectacular. So now let's talk a little bit about the difficulty. A lot have been said about this. The game even got review bombed on Steam. A lot of people were throwing their arms up, admitting defeat, that they would never complete this piece of content, that it was unfair and brutally difficult for the sake of being difficult. And man, I gotta tell you, I'm getting really tired of the conversation, the never-ending conversation that From Software games need easy modes. Literally every single new FromSoft release brings up this question. Then Miyazaki has to come out and remind everyone that the difficulty plays a major role in the design and theme of their games, despite the fact that he's inserted summons, various magic options, and of course co-op play, which can absolutely make things more manageable. But I guess people refuse to use these tools. I don't know. I can't tell you how many clips I saw online of people fighting a boss and they're just doing no damage. They're doing 0 damage, and then they're getting two-shotted by the boss, and they're saying it's unfair, it's too difficult. Guys, did you level up? Did you find any Shadow Tree fragments? The game tells you to find Shadow Tree fragments to power up your character. I don't think anybody was finding these things. I don't think anybody was doing this. But as usual, it would seem enough time passes in between new games and people just forget how punishing FromSoft is, then the cycle repeats itself. I do consider myself to be an above average player simply because I've played and beaten every game and a vast majority of the DLC, but I'm also not like a super sweaty top 1% player who does no hit runs or can do a rune level 1 playthrough. You know, I've never done anything like that before, and I never will. But aside from perhaps the final boss, I found it to be very much in line with other Soulsborne titles, but just like every new game, there are aspects you need to learn about, and patience and diligence are key. And a massive part of ensuring this game is nice and balanced for the player is the new leveling system, which we can get into now. I think FromSoft did a smart thing of essentially bringing our characters down to level 1 and presenting an entirely new method of leveling up for the DLC. By endgame, most players are going to be entering the DLC at level 150 or greater. They introduced a new item, the Shadow Tree Fragment, that will increase your attack and defense by 5 to 10% every time you level up at a Site of Grace. While I think that's a fine idea, I do not like the randomness of finding these damn things. Sometimes you get them from defeating larger enemies, but a vast majority of the time, they're just scattered throughout the open world. There's really no rhyme or reason as to their hiding places other than the couple of churches that always house a couple. And this completely spits in the face of the tried and true formula introduced in the base game. Get stuck on a boss, hit the open world, level up, come back once you're stronger. In the DLC, you get stuck on a boss, hit the open world, pray to God that you happen to find any of these fragments, and then return to the boss once you're stronger. But it can be so frustrating. Obviously, you have no idea where these things are. You're roaming the open world, which I already said was kind of empty and boring, and all you're finding is cookbooks and smithing stones. You only want Shadow Tree fragments. That's the only reason you went out in the open world, so you can get these fragments and go back to the boss that you're stuck on. But instead, you're just finding worthless item after worthless item. It's a pain. At least it was for me, in my opinion. In base Elden Ring, gathering runes felt organic and natural. You guided your own experience, essentially leveling up when you wanted to and how you wanted to. In Shadow of the Erdtree, I spent hours riding around, finding nothing but smithing stones and cookbooks. It was very frustrating. I felt like I was wasting my time and that I had no control over my character's growth. So there's a few tweaks I would have liked to see to remedy this. First, add more Shadow Tree fragments, more than you need to hit the max level cap. In the base game, FromSoft put, I believe, 48 golden seeds to upgrade your healing flasks, but you only need 30 to hit the max level. In the DLC, you need all 50 of the available 50 fragments to hit max level. The margin for error is 0 if you plan on reaching that milestone, and with how hard these enemies can hit, you'll definitely be needing them. Another change I would have liked to see is for fragments to drop after defeating overworld and side bosses or completing mini dungeons. In the base game, a major incentive for diving into these optional activities was the promise of weapons and armor, of course, but more importantly, it was the runes to level up your character. In the DLC, runes do still play a part for sure, but their usefulness is nothing compared to the tree fragments, so it would have been nice for them to drop after defeating tough enemies. All that said, once you've acquired these tree fragments, your character's power relative to the bosses is as balanced as any other FromSoft game, and if you're having trouble finding the fragments or are simply tired of wasting your time on horseback, there are plenty of guides out there to expedite the process. So another aspect of the difficulty that I've seen people complain a lot about online is the lengthy combo strings and the minuscule windows we have to do actual damage. And I have some positive and negative thoughts on this. It's true that sometimes you find yourself dodging around for 5 to 10 seconds only to squeeze in a single light attack before you have to start rolling around again. Boss aggression is at an all-time high, and I do feel like FromSoft is getting a little cheeky with these movesets at times. But as with every other FromSoft boss fight, with enough practice and repetition, you'll eventually start to piece it together, and as annoying as those long combo strings can be, I think we all know that feeling of reading a boss perfectly, and it's arguably the most satisfying here because of it. But I do understand the complaints. As player skill increases over the years, the difficulty ceiling is also being pushed higher and higher. But I think this is where FromSoft is in a tough position when it comes to balancing modern Soulsborne. Because at least to some degree, FromSoft has to balance the game for players of many skill levels. It's true that sweaty FromSoft veterans may not have an issue with Mesmer, but he may be absolutely crushing a more casual player. So who should FromSoft cater to when it comes to balancing? They wouldn't want to make it too easy for the veterans, but also can't make it too soul-crushing for the casuals. Luckily, it's not for me to figure out, and in my personal experience, I loved nearly every single boss. So we're going to talk about bosses next, but I want to squeeze in a little section for the legacy dungeons. Because oh my god, FromSoft continues to flex their dominance of the linear progression style that this series originates from. As much as I love Elden Ring and its open world concepts, going through each of its legacy dungeons makes me long for the next non-open world entry. Creeping down narrow hallways, checking your corners, the satisfaction of unlocking a big shortcut, or the relief of the next site of grace, staples that will never get old for me. Visually, each dungeon is distinct and gorgeous. My jaw dropped several times throughout this expansion, and one would think we'd just be used to it by now, but that's just From Software for you. I don't know how they keep doing it. They're always raising the bar, and it feels like when they've hit their peak that they just push it another step further. But okay, let's go ahead and tackle the bosses. I thought they were all great for the most part. Even some of the reused guys and some of like the catacombs and stuff, like the Death Knights, even they were incredibly fun. And good God, the designs and presentation are unlike anything I've ever seen. The opening cutscenes, the music, the movesets were absolutely mind-blowing. They hit me early on with this introduction to the Dancing Lion, and I just knew FromSoft was pulling out all the stops with their presentation. Now, if I did have a complaint, it would be that most of the boss arenas were just big open circles with little to no obstacles or varying geometry for us to take cover. May not sound like a big deal, but imagine if you removed the pillars from Ornstein and Smog, or the tombstones from the Father Gascoigne fight. The boss arena can be super impactful, so I was really disappointed on that front. And lastly, we're going to dive into the story a bit. I'm not going to break down the lore or anything like that. That's not what this is. Just kind of a general reflection on how I think they did. And what I loved most about this DLC story is the fact that it's kind of a prequel and a sequel at the same time. Prequel in the sense that we discover a lot of origins of different characters, Marika especially, her ascension to godhood, how she created the lands between that we know from the base game. Not to mention a secret war that was taking place between the Golden Order and the Hornsent in the distant past. but then it's also a sequel or a continuation of the base game story as we, the new Elden Lord, have come to the realm of shadows in a search for kind Miquella to prevent his ascension to godhood. I thought everything was handled really well, except for one aspect, or should I say one character. That's Godwyn the Golden. Godwyn the Golden is the last of the demigod children that we really don't know that much about. There's still a ton of mystery surrounding this character, and we've never even seen him in his true physical form. Yes, he has that mutated, like, nasty pus ball of a body at the root of the Erdtree, the death roots, right? But we never actually see Godwyn in his true human form. And God, that would have made a great final boss. That would have made a spectacular final boss. I love Radahn as much as the next guy. And the fight itself, I did very much enjoy. But you swap Radahn out for Godwyn in that moment, in that stage, holy cow. That would have been one of the more memorable fights in all of From Software. To reuse Radahn, obviously he's got a different move set, but this is a boss that we've seen previously. To reuse him as the final boss of this DLC, I thought was a big mistake, honestly. I think Godwyn would have fit within the lore. I think they could have figured that out. And so yeah, it was a little, I don't want to say it was disappointing. Radahn wasn't disappointing, but I feel like it could have been so much better had they really leaned into Godwyn and fleshed him out more. I feel like a lot of questions would have been answered, and it would have made for a more impactful climax. But that's really my only major criticism. I mean, I'm still devouring the lore discussion videos, the discoveries, the theories. I love all that stuff. Vati, come on, man. We got to increase the pace of your lore drop videos here. We're all waiting. We're starving. We're starving. No, but while I'm not breaking down the lore very heavily here in this video, I'd love to talk about that stuff with you guys down in the comments below. Let me know maybe what are some of your favorite aspects of the lore, maybe some discoveries that you've made or some theories you have. I'm super down to talk about that stuff in the comments section. But that's all I've got for you today. Final thoughts on Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. It was fabulous. I had some criticisms. I do think there are some objective flaws with it. But at the end of the day, I dropped another, I don't know, 40 to 50 hours into Elden Ring thanks to this DLC. Just like when the base game dropped, it's all I thought about all day, every day, no matter my routine, no matter what I was doing, showering, sleeping, eating. I was always thinking or dreaming about Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree. So despite my complaints with it, man, it was still great. It was so great. Best DLC they've ever dropped? I mean, probably. Now it's kind of hard to compare because this is definitely the biggest budget DLC that FromSoft has ever done. So can you really compare Elden Ring DLC, a $40 DLC that gives you 50 plus hours of content in one playthrough versus, you know, a Dark Souls 1 or Dark Souls 3 DLC that sure adds a good amount of content, adds a couple of bosses here and there, but it's kind of hard to compare in a sense because it is just an entirely different beast. But yeah, I'd say for the amount of content, it's probably the best DLC FromSoft has ever dropped. So it was a great time. I love it. I'm still thinking about Elden Ring now, even though I've beaten the DLC at the recording of this video probably 4 days ago. Man, I'm still thinking about it. I started a new game plus I'm going through again, but what a great game. What a great DLC. Well, guys, that's it. I'm done rambling. Just so you know, the next video I drop will also be for Shadow of the Erdtree. I'm going to rank all of the bosses from my least favorite to most favorite. So if you're into Elden Ring content, you want a little bit more of that, stay tuned, subscribe, like this video, and I guess I'll see you there. Peace.